Hi, welcome to Talent Sprint. In this video, we will look at correcting incorrect or wrong language practices. Right from school and through college, we've just been using language in a certain way because we've heard people use it and we just replicate it or follow it, not knowing whether it is the right usage or not. For example, when will I use among, or when should I use between? Or is it required for me to say responsible to or responsible for, right? What is the preposition that ideally goes with that word? Or even a difference between on and onto, and some contrast words, that we are a little confused. When should I use except? When should I use unless? When should I use until? Right? So things like that. So we're going to get down to basics now. This video will definitely help you in addressing finding errors question type, right? Error detection. So this is going to be extremely useful for you to approach that particular question type, and otherwise also enhance your communication as a whole, because we are talking about using the right choice of words, the right construction in a sentence, and following the right form when it comes to speaking or writing. So let's get down to it. Let's look at our first component, which is difference between but and however. Now, but is a conjunction, right? It's a linking word. It's a contrast clue word. It also links two sentences or two clauses. So ideally a sentence should not begin with but. Let's look at an example sentence. We waited for him for a long time, but he did not turn up. So you see, but is acting like a conjunction, right? But is acting like a conjunction connecting these two clauses. What are the clauses? The first clause is we waited for him for a long time. That's our first clause. And the second clause is he did not turn up, right? So having looked at these two clauses, again, what is a clause? A clause is a phrase with a complete thought, which has a subject and a verb, right? It's one complete thought. We waited for him for a long time is one clause. He did not turn up is the second clause, and but is acting as a conjunction connecting these two clauses. So but here takes up the meaning of although. Waited for him for a long time, although he did not turn up. So but what about however? Now however takes up the meaning of nevertheless, right? Usually however is either preceded or followed by a semicolon, and usually followed by a comma in a sentence. Let's look at an example. So let's look at the example sentence. It says, we were supposed to go to the party last night. However, it was called off much to our surprise. So here again, like I said, however brings in the meaning of nevertheless. We were supposed to go to the party last night. Nevertheless, it was called off much to our surprise. Do you see the colon preceding however and the comma following however? Let's look at one more example sentence with however, just to look at the construction of it and how the punctuations play an important role. So in this example sentence, it says the book is expensive, however, it's worth it, right? It is contracted to its. So again, look at the colon, the semicolon preceding however, and then we have the comma right after however. So punctuations also play an important role in terms of construction and the usage of the English language, right? So we'll have to keep that in mind, especially when while writing. But for now, I think overall you've understood the difference in meaning that but and however brings in a context, and how it's constructed in a sentence. So let's move on to our second component. The second component that we're looking at is the difference between except, unless, and until. So again, let's understand how it's constructed in a sentence and what meaning does it convey or does it bring to the table. Except brings in the meaning of other than or exclusion. Let's look at an example sentence. So if you look at this example sentence, it says they did not open their mouths except to complain. So other than to complain, they never open their mouths. That's what this sentence is saying. But what about exclusion? Let's look at an example sentence where except brings in the meaning of exclusion. So in this example sentence we see it says an admission fee is charged but children are accepted. Nothing but an admission fee is charged but children are excluded, right? Excluding them, everybody else needs to pay an admission fee. That's what the sentence conveys. So this is except. What about unless? Let's move on to our second word, unless. Our second word, unless, brings in the meaning of except on the condition that, or except under the circumstances that. Let's look at an example sentence. So looking at this example sentence, it says, we'll be there at 9 unless the train is late. So here, unless is bringing in the meaning that, except the condition is that if the train is late, then we won't be able to come early. That's what it says. Right, let's look at one more example sentence. Our second example sentence, they'll sell it unless he hears otherwise. So again, bringing in the meaning of, under the circumstances that. So they will sell it unless under the circumstances that he hears otherwise. So here is unless for you in terms of context and in terms of the meaning that it conveys in a sentence. And what about our last word, until? Let's look at that. Until, our third word, brings in the meaning of up to the time that, or when. Let's look at an example sentence. We walked until it got dark. So up to the time it got dark, we kept walking. That's the meaning that the sentence is conveying. Let's look at one more example sentence. I lived with my parents until I was 18. So up to the time that I was 18, I stayed with my parents, right? So again, we completely understand the difference between except, unless and until in different contexts, and we've understood the meaning that it conveys in the context. Let's move on to our next component. Difference between the number and a number. Now, the number is a singular collective form, and a number is a plural form. So let's look at our example sentences. The number of applicants is acting as a singular collective noun, and then I have is steadily increasing, right? So that verb is giving us the meaning that we need. The number and is. Let's look at the next sentence. There are several students in the lobby. A number are here to see the president. A number are here. So a number takes up a plural form. One of many, right? A number. One of any kind. So this is pretty much the difference between the number and a number. Let's move to our next component. Now, whenever you have sentences beginning with one of the, each of the, some of the, usually object of the preposition of takes up a plural noun. Let's understand this with some example sentences. Let's look at this example sentence. One of the reasons we do this is it rains a lot in September. So if you see, the sentence begins with one of the, and then I have a plural subject, right? Reasons. Let's look at one more example sentence. So again, I have one of the students, a plural noun or subject following one of the, right? So keep this in mind. The same applies for sentences that begin with each of the, right, or some of the. Let's look at other example sentences for the same. So each of the girls is expected to sing. So each of the, right? Each of the girls is expected to sing. Again, if you see each of the followed by a plural noun. or subject, right? The same applies for some of the, so keep that in mind. Let's move to our next component. The next one is something to do with modal verbs. Now we're aware of what our modal verbs are, right? Can, could, may, might, shall, should, will, would, should. Now, when formed in a sentence, the construction would be, some of the students have heard them say, or some of the people, when they speak, they say, he could did it, right? Or she can studied, right? So if you look at those example sentences, there's something wrong. What is wrong? Now, if you notice, the verb that follows the modal should be the first verb or the base verb form. What do I mean by this? Let's look at an example sentence. Now, in those example sentences, he could did it and he may not made it is incorrect. Modal verbs are could and may. Right? Now, having looked at these modal verbs, we understand that the verb that follows it, did and made, has to be in the first verb or the base verb form. What is that? What is the first verb of did? Do. What is the first verb of made? Make. So that's what we need to do. Let's quickly go ahead and make that change here. So he could do it would be appropriate, and he may not make it would be appropriate again, right? So keep in mind that the base verb or the first verb is what follows the modals. Let's look at a couple of other examples as well. For example, he should study hard, not he should studied hard, right? Or he can cook well, not he can cooked well. Let's look at one more example sentence. Something on the lines of he might do it, not he might did it, right? So do you understand, do you follow the structure that after every modal you use the first tense, first verb or the base verb form? So let's move to our next component. Our next component that we're going to look at is degree of comparison. Now we usually familiar with what are our degrees of comparison, right? We have the positive degree, we have the comparative degree, and we have the superlative degree. Now, sometimes people tend to misuse this form. How do I put that in context? Let's look at an example. So if I say this book is more heavier than I thought, right? Heavier, I understand, is a comparative form of degree, right? And I'm already comparing the book with other books probably. So there is no need for me to add that more when I'm already using the comparative form heavier, right? Likewise, if I have to say, if I'm comparing all the books and I single out one book, and if I say this book is the most heaviest of all, again, incorrect usage, because you're already signaling out the book saying the heaviest, which means compared to all the books, this is the most heaviest. Again, incorrect use. You don't use most with heaviest, you don't use more with heavier. Let's put that down just to make sure we understand this in context. So in these example sentences, both these sentences are incorrect because you have more heavier and most heaviest coming. Let's quickly correct that. So you remove more and you remove most, right? The book is heavier than I thought. This book is the heaviest of all. Still conveys the correct degree of comparison in terms of context and language. Let's look at a couple of other sentences. So having looked at these two example sentences, it says my sister is the most tallest in our family. Again, all we need to do is delete most. My sister is the tallest in our family. It's understood out of everyone she is the tallest. Likewise, the next sentence, I can run more faster than you. Faster is again comparing you and I. So I don't need that additional more there. So let's correct that again. So there we have the corrected sentences. My sister is the tallest in our family. I can run faster than you. Let's move to our next component. Our next component is understanding the difference between among and between. Now conventionally, what we've been told is you use between when you're comparing two elements, right? And among when you're comparing more than two elements. But that is not the appropriate thing. Let's look at it in context. Now when you are talking about individual distinct items or components, then also you use between even if it's more than two. Let's look at an example sentence. In this example sentence, it says the differences between English, Chinese and Arabic are significant. Now if you notice, there are more than two elements here, right? We're not just looking at two items, we're looking at more than two items, English, Chinese and Arabic, but they are distinctly individual, right? So we can use between when it's more than two distinct individual items. Let's look at one more example sentence. In this example sentence, it says, I cannot decide between the green shirt, the black shirt and the blue shirt, where you see that they are distinct individual items. So even if it's more than two, I'm still using between. So when do I use among them? Among is used when the items are not distinct, right? When it's referring to a group. Let's look at the same example sentences and make some changes to accommodate among in these sentences. See how we've made the difference very distinctly. The differences among languages are significant. So here languages are considered as a group, a collective component. Likewise, the next sentence, I cannot decide among these shirts. So you're not distinctly, individualizing the shirts, but they are considered as one collective component, one group. So you use among. So this is pretty much the difference when it comes to among and between. Among is reciprocal, one member to another. Between is more of a group, right? When you're referring to a group of things or group of people. Let's move on to our next component. Our next component is the difference between on and onto, right? Now these are prepositions, so it denotes some sort of location, position, direction, right? So let's understand this in terms of a context. When I say on, it refers to a location. So if I say the marker is on the table, I'm talking about its location. But if I say, I can't say the marker is onto the table, right? But I can say he climbed onto the table. What I'm trying to convey there is some sort of a movement from one location to another, right? There is a movement from one place to another. So that's pretty much the difference between on and onto. Let's put that in context. So these example sentences clearly bring to us the difference between on and onto in terms of meaning. Onto also has another meaning which says fully aware of or being informed about. So if I say the police are on to the plans of the robber or the plans of the culprit, or he's on to something. When I say that, what I'm trying to convey is this person is aware of something or he's informed about something. So he's planning something. He's on to something, right? He has a plan. So let's put that in context. Right? So there we have our second context, bringing in the meaning of onto in terms of being fully aware or informed about something. The police are onto the robber's plans. So this kind of helps you understand the difference between on and onto. Let's move to our next component. The next component that we have is what is the difference between responsible to and responsible for. It pretty much talks about the prepositions again, to and for. But let's understand that when I say someone is responsible for something, I am talking about an ownership position, right? they take ownership of that particular task, right? So it's an ownership position. But when I say responsible to is a submissive position, meaning to say this person is obligated to you, right? For example, I can say the politician is responsible to the people who elected him, which means he's answerable to them, right? So let's put that in context. Looking at these two example sentences, I am responsible for this project, meaning to say I own this project, right? Nobody can come and ask me because it's my baby. I want to do this. I know exactly what goes into this. I have a plan. I have an agenda. This is my project. I own this project. But in the second example, the politician is responsible to the people who elected him. He is obligated to them. He is answerable to them. It's a submissive position. So keep that in mind when you're applying responsible to and responsible for in a context. Let's look at our next component. Our last component is about reflexive pronouns. Now this is a interesting pronoun because the object of the sentence is the same as the subject. What I'm trying to say is if there is no subject, you can't ideally start a sentence with a reflexive pronoun. Now sometimes when I ask some people to introduce themselves, they start off saying myself Ram, myself Arun, myself Sita, or myself Geeta, which is incorrect, right? You have to have a subject in the sentence preceding, because action is done upon oneself. That's what the nature or function of a reflexive pronoun is, right? You understand your reflexive pronouns: myself, yourself, himself, herself, ourselves, themselves. So let's look at an example sentence. So if you look at those two example sentences, the first sentence it says that knife is sharp, you might cut yourself. If you look at that example sentence, you is the subject and then you have yourself, which is making reference to the subject, right? Likewise in the second example, I am teaching myself to learn the piano. So I is the subject. Who are you teaching? Myself, right? That's my reflexive pronoun. So the object of the sentence is the same as the subject. So keep that in mind. Never start a sentence with a reflexive pronoun, which is incorrect usage. So looking at all these components that we've covered so far, we understand that there are some incorrect or wrong language practices that we've been applying and following, and it is high time to change that now that we know what the right usage is. So keep practicing, and I will see you guys in a next session on another topic.